Real Country 1430 WRDN, Brian Winnikins. We are at World Dairy Expo, and thank you to our expo sponsors, including Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, also the Wisconsin Farmers Union, Tractor Central, and BASF. Ashley Gausman, your representative, serving Northwest Wisconsin. Joining me today is Chris Galen with the National Milk Producers Federation. And Chris, last year at this time we were talking about, oh my word, we're going to have this trade war with China, and what's that all going to mean? And this year, imagine what a year makes. We're all talking about Class 7, ding dong, the witch is dead. Class 7's going away in Canada. So what have you been able to and what has National Milk been able to discern from this agreement with Canada? Should dairy farmers be dancing in the streets that, okay, the witch is dead because Class 7's going away?
Well, I would make certain that you've got some other things to do with your dancing shoes besides dancing right away. Obviously, we are in a much better place now than where we were a month ago or a year ago, Brian. So I think the good news is that Canada has agreed to limit its export subsidies, do away with Class 7, which in effect created an export subsidy that violated their trade commitments, and we will have some additional market access into the Canadian market over time. I think the biggest headline, though, is simply that we are maintaining the architecture of the NAFTA pact. It is going to have a new name, and it will be somewhat different in its terms going forward, but the bottom line is that we still have a continent-wide agreement that importantly will allow us to maintain our market access to Mexico. So we're getting a little more in Canada, but the more important thing, and I think it's always going to be more important, is we need to be able to reach those consumers in Mexico, and hopefully with this agreement, once it gets finalized, that will continue to happen.
Now, you mentioned that we've kept the basic framework of NAFTA in place. So is that going to mean, at least for U.S. dairy, specifically Wisconsin dairy as well, that we'll actually have either the same market access we had one before, or we're going to actually see some additional market access? Because really the devil's here in the details.
Yeah, the devil's in the details, and it's not even so much about what was signed here in the past week, but how it will be implemented. One of the reasons why I answered your initial question with a little bit of caution is that Canada has a history of making promises but not always necessarily keeping them, or keeping them to the spirit of the agreement. So, for instance, like the creation of Class 6 and Class 7 in the last couple of years was designed to circumvent the limits that they agreed to with what they exported. And so that's why we needed to roll it back. And the NAFTA renegotiation came at an opportune time to do that. But if we didn't have the NAFTA renegotiations, we still would have had to do something about Canada, because it hurt not just the U.S., but many other countries as well with what they were doing in international milk powder market. So all a way of saying that we need to see how this agreement is implemented so that promises made at this point are promises that are kept in the future.
Talking with Chris Galen with the National Milk Producers Federation this morning. Why did Canada give up Class 7? Because, boy, I'll tell you what, with all the media, dairy farmers of Canada even said, you give up Class 7, there'll be a new government in Canada. So why did they give it up?
Well, I think that they recognize that it was a blatant violation and conflict with what they had agreed to do, and it affected not just the U.S., but other countries were complaining about it as well, going back more than a year. Europe didn't like it, the European dairy sector, Australia and New Zealand didn't like it. So what Canada did was an affront not just to the U.S., but to other nations as well, and I think they recognized that it was going to be hard to get away with that over the long term.
Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about the dairy product labeling issue. Obviously, Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin has introduced some resolutions to force FDA to follow the rules. She's called FDA out on the carpet. She's brought them in committee hearings. FDA is still kind of not enforcing the rules here.
Yeah, so the good news here is that the FDA commissioner, when he spoke with Senator Baldwin this summer during a hearing, admitted that you don't got milk from an almond, almonds don't lactate, and that he was going to be taking a closer look at this issue. And he has followed through on that pledge, and he has opened up a comment period here to allow the dairy sector and other involved interest groups to weigh in and say, this is why this issue of the fake dairy products is a problem and why it needs to be changed. So we have an opportunity, and it may be the best and only opportunity that we get, Brian, for us to weigh in with the FDA and show why this is a public health issue, why it's important to have these standards in the first place, and why not all milks are created equal. What's happening is that the vegans, who are the big proponents of these plant-based foods, are saying, well, I'm not confused about soy milk or almond milk. I know that they don't come from a cow. That's great. That's not who we're concerned with. We're concerned with the rank and file people who go to the grocery store, who see all these different things labeled milk or cheese or yogurt in the dairy case, and they think, well, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. It's like Coke and Pepsi. They're basically kind of the same stuff. It's just a matter of preference of taste. Well, no, it's not. It's a matter of nutrition. We've done a lot of research into what products are out there in the marketplace. None of the plant-based dairy imitators have the same amount of nutrition on a consistent basis as real cow's milk. So that fact is going to inform our arguments with the FDA, and then the FDA is going to hopefully process that and use that to decide how they're going to regulate these products in the future.
Very frustrating, though, I guess, from my standpoint, and I think for dairy farmers' standpoint is, wait a minute, we have a law that says milk comes from a lactating animal, and that's how you have to label it, and FDA continues to just drag their feet. I get it, they want public comment, but wait a minute, this is the law, follow the law, enforce the law, and who cares about the comments, frankly?
Yeah, in an ideal world, that would be the situation, Brian. And speaking of the world, the U.S. really is at odds with a lot of other countries. In Canada, you will not find almond milk. And in fact, even the product in the U.S. that's called muscle milk, up in Canada is called muscle MLK. They can't call it milk. So that is one thing that we agree with the Canadians about. They are much more protective of dairy in a lot of respects, including on the labeling. But then the same is also true in Europe and in England. So the U.S. is at odds here with how it reviews and how it enforces these labels. I think the FDA is trying to get information in order to provide a basis for what it is going to do. So we need to help it do its job, help the agency do its job. That's a little frustrating because, as you said, they shouldn't necessarily need a lot of prompting to do this, but we are where we are, and we need to be able to move forward and provide them with information so that they can take enforcement action against these mislabeled products.
That is Chris Galen. He is with the National Milk Producers Federation from World Dairy Expo. I'm Brian Winnikins.